In the past 4 years, I've nearly doubled my body weight, completely natural. This video is a complete roadmap for your first bulk so you can get jacked like I did. Follow the steps and you'll build more muscle faster than you've ever imagined. Let's get into it. All right, looking at our roadmap here, this is going to be your first bulk. And we're starting at the bottom here because that is where we are currently. We are at the beginning, and I want to assume that you know nothing so that by the end of this, you'll know everything. First, we want to start with terms that we need to cover. These are basic terms that I'm going to be using throughout the video. Just core concepts, things to expect so that you expect the unexpected when the unexpected arises. So we will start by covering terms, and then we're going to move to training. I'm not going to go into all of the intricacies, the nuances of it. I want you to know everything you need to know to start making progress, because that's what we're in the game for. We're trying to make progress. Then we're going to do a little 90-degree downward spiral here to nutrition. Nutrition 101. You're going to learn about calories, macros, how different foods affect your bodies, which kind of foods we should be eating in order to build muscle. Then from that, we're going to go to tracking. And by tracking, I mean tracking the tangible metrics of your training and your nutrition. So there's a bunch of different things that we can track, but I want to focus on the most important sets of data that we need to be aware of during our process of building muscle. Now, the interesting thing about tracking is that when it comes to doing workouts and eating properly, these things directly influence muscle growth. Without workouts and without proper nutrition, you're not building any kind of physique, any kind of muscle, any kind of strength anytime soon. And so if we were to look at tracking, it's not the same as these. Tracking is not like a 1 + 1 = 2 kind of scenario. Tracking only gives you visibility. It only shows you the data that you are getting stronger, that you are getting bigger, that you are getting what you want. For example, if you don't know how many calories you're eating, how much you weigh, what the lifts are in the gym, how many reps are you doing with how much weight, if you have no idea what these things are, you're only decreasing the probability that you will succeed. And so if we are in the game to win, we want to win with the highest probability. Would that not make sense? I think so. So that's why I'm a big proponent of tracking metrics. And finally, with our training, our nutrition, and our tracking of both, I'm going to boil down everything here into actions, because I am a core believer that we can't sit and ask to be saved for gains. We have to take action. And so the actions that I've decided to, or I guess the categories I've decided to break them up in, are things you do daily, weekly, and monthly. Forgive my horrible handwriting there. Actions that you're doing on a daily basis, actions that you're doing once a week or at least regularly, and actions that you're doing on a monthly basis. If you do the actions that lead to muscle growth every single day, every single week, every single month, and you give yourself 6 months to achieve it, I promise you that you will see gains. So today I want you to follow me on this magical roadmap of the things we need to do to build muscle so that you can eventually build muscle. First, terms and truths. These are just words that I'll be using in the video and concepts you should be aware of, like I said, to expect the unexpected. The green ones have to do with your diet, and the red ones have to do with your workouts. So we'll start with this. Calories. Calories are just energy. When you think calories, you think energy, you think fuel. Food, drinks, things that you consume on a daily basis, these things have calories. They have fuel for your body to use and convert into energy. If you were to look at your body like a car needs gas, a car needs fuel. This is your fuel. And so, in order to build muscle, you need more of it than you're burning off. We'll talk about the specifics of this, but to create new tissue on your body, to create new muscle mass, to create strength, for the most part, we're going to be needing more fuel than we are letting go of. Therefore, we can use those extra resources to devote to muscle growth. Next, I want to talk about macros. You've probably heard these before. There's 4 main types of macros. We'll get into them in a second. But macros are essentially types of fuel that your body takes in at a large quantity. So if you've ever seen micronutrients like your vitamins, your vitamin B, your magnesium, your zinc, all these things, those are micronutrients. Your body doesn't need a lot of them. But macronutrients, your body does need a lot of. And those are, I'll list them out, carbs, protein, fat, and alcohol is the 4th one. But you're probably not having a diet consisting of much alcohol. hopefully. So we're going to focus on carbs, protein, fat. Next, when I'm talking about training, I'm going to mention training to failure and training with intensity. I'll start with this. Ideally, you want to be having the muscle that you're trying to train to be the one that fails. So if I'm doing a bicep curl, I want my biceps to be the thing that is limiting me from completing that rep. I don't want it to be my shoulders or the momentum or my chest or my butt. I want it to be the muscle that I'm training. And when I mention intensity, it just means how hard you're going. How close to failure are you pushing? Next, I want to talk about warming up, right? You're pretty aware of what a warm-up is, but you want to make sure that the muscles you're trying to train are ready to go. So I'm going to walk you through proper warm-up practices just so you don't get hurt or at least minimize the probability of that happening. Next, and finally, working sets. These are the sets that we are trying to build muscle. When we are training to failure, we're training with high intensity. That is considered a working set. If you were to think of your sets like a basketball game, right? You have your warm up at the beginning of the game. You're doing your layups, you're running back and forth, you're practicing, you're dribbling, doing whatever. The working set is the game. That is when you have to perform. So you're going to see me mention this quite a bit. As for truths, building muscle costs money. It is not a free sport, but it is one of the cheapest if you do it right. A big concern a lot of people have is buying expensive groceries, expensive gym memberships, all this equipment. At the end of the day, you just need the right amount of food that you're growing and a good enough gym that has the equipment that you like and want to use. And if you want to get supplements or specific accessories, I'm not going to talk about that at all in this video because that's not necessary for muscle growth. But if you want to get those things, they cost money too. For the most part, you can expect to spend 15 to 25 bucks a day to build muscle, which is probably the cheapest pursuit in the entire world. Okay, truth number 2. Results take time. We understand this conceptually, but when put into practice or when it happens in the moment, we kind of forget this, myself included, so it's not that big of a deal. But results, they don't take days, they don't take weeks, they don't take months. For the most part, they take years. And for the most part, if you're really trying to gas it and get crazy good results, I'm talking way above average, world-class even, that takes decades. And so, it takes time. You have to give time. But the point of the actions thing that I was talking about earlier, how I was going to break it all down into actions that you do every day, the goal isn't to get jacked. The goal is to complete the actions. And so if you can complete the actions every day, the results will happen as a byproduct if you give it enough time. The problem is guys don't give it enough time and they give up because things get hard and they forget why they started. Finally, quitting is losing. It is not related. It is not in the same category or tax bracket. Quitting is the exact same as losing. If you've ever seen a loser, that is somebody who continuously quits or gives up when things get rough. If you do not quit, you're not guaranteed victory, but your probabilities are a heck of a lot higher. Doing the right things every single day without stopping, that leads to growth. But what happens is, like I said, guys don't give themselves enough time and then they quit too early and then they say the gym doesn't work or I don't have good genetics. You're not going to find out how good your genetics are until you're at least a year or 2 years in. All right. So don't look at this from day one and say, oh, I can't do this because for whatever reason I have this specific condition. That stuff doesn't matter. Okay. Terms and truths are out of the way. We understand the definitions of these things and we understand that these things are going to occur. They are a requisite for success. So let's move on to training. So getting into training 101, I'm going to break it down into 4 basic concepts. All right, the first philosophy is to train hard, not stupid. Here's what I mean by this. So many people crap on ego lifting and make it out to be this big devil and something that you should absolutely avoid. And honestly, I agree in part. The reason why guys ego lift is because of 3 reasons. The weight is too heavy. So if I were to grab my 15-pound dumbbell here and I would do exercise with it, if I know deep in my heart that this is way too heavy for me and I probably shouldn't be going anywhere near this, why am I using it in my exercise? Well, some people use this because they want to impress other people, but other people don't care about your workouts. We're here to get better for you. And so people use heavy weights because they are insecure about themselves. I'm hoping that you watching this video, that is not you, because that is a problem that is more than what exercise and fitness can solve. Next, they cut ROM. What does ROM mean? ROM. It is an acronym for range of motion. If you are looking at an exercise If I'm doing a curl, let's just say full extension, full contraction. But if I'm purposely cutting the range of motion and I'm going halfway down because I want to make it easier, that means that this weight is probably too heavy for me. So guys cut range of motion because they want to lift heavier weight and look more impressive. The third reason why guys ego lift is to cut control. What do I mean by control? I'm picking up my dumbbell again. If you're curling the weight up and you're just dropping it down, the goal of building muscle is to create tension on the muscle you're trying to train. And so do you really think that there's a lot of tension on my bicep when I'm just letting the weight drop? No, right? The reason why guys do this is because it's easier. It's easier to do that rather than curl it and let it down slowly and keep that bicep, keeping the tension on the bicep, getting a full stretch, squeezing it up, full contraction, full stretch all the way down. Now that we've broken down ego lifting into using too much weight, cutting range of motion, and cutting control, you can see that this is a recipe for what not to do. And so when I say train hard, I mean train with high intensity. I mean train to failure. Remember, we covered those definitions earlier. We're not training stupid. This is stupid. And this is kind of funny just how I wrote it. If you want to go against this rule and train like an idiot, you can train stupid and not train hard. So what is the difference between hard and stupid? Well, we know what stupid is. It's right over here. So let's talk about training hard. First, we have to understand that building muscle is the body's response to physical stress and tension. And I don't mean stress in the sense that you have a bunch of paperwork due tomorrow or that your girlfriend's leaving you. Not that kind of stress. I mean the physical stress of having the strain, those are lightning bolts, on the muscle, right? You saw me controlling that dumbbell as I'm bringing it down. The tension is on the bicep. The bicep is working to lift that weight up and not letting it drop. Same when I'm curling it up. I'm contracting my bicep to lift that weight. Then I'm bringing it down nice, slow, and controlled all the way down. Stupid would just be dropping it, right? So what does training to failure look like? You want to make sure that the muscle you're actually trying to work out is the first one that fails. And what I mean by this is if I'm doing a bicep curl, I don't want the lack of momentum to be the reason why I can't do another rep. If I'm curling and I can't do any more reps, I want my biceps to be the reason why that's happening because I know that I worked my biceps to their maximum ability. You want to be training to the max. Your working sets should be taken to the max. And over time, you're going to get better at training and you will be able to feel the muscle more. You'll be able to do all these fancy schmancy things. But right now, I just want you to train hard and with control and not stupid, cutting range of motion, doing all that cheap stuff that all the weird guys do. So you want to make sure that the muscle you're trying to train is the first one that fails. How do we do that? We do that by lifting with control. And there's two ways that I can break this down. Limiting momentum and then increasing the range of motion. So by momentum, I would mean thrusting your body to get that weight up. If you think my biceps are doing a whole lot of work when I'm exercising like this, you would be incorrect. We don't want to be using a ton of momentum. The goal is that we're trying to target the muscle we want to train in that exercise and train it very hard, essentially putting a big magnifying glass on the muscle and beating the heck out of it. And then you just want to have full range of motion. That means going from a full stretch position to a fully contracted position. That goes for all exercises. The amount of range of motion that you can get will be dependent on you, your body type, how long your limbs are, how good your flexibility is, how strong your joints are, all that other stuff, but you want to go as full as you can go. That covers point number one. The second point that I want to cover is moving a weight versus lifting it. Now, what is the difference between these two things? It seems like the same thing, right? I'm going to start with this. So if you've ever seen sports like powerlifting or Olympic weightlifting where the objective is to lift more weight than everybody else in your weight class, you're trying to hit a specific number, those guys are going to do multiple things, depending on the sport, to make that lift as easy as possible without breaking the rules. And so their goal is to lift a certain amount of weight, which means they're not worried about putting tension on any kind of muscles. They're just trying to get the weight from point A to B. The difference between this and this is that when you're lifting with the goal of building muscle, your objective is to put as much tension and strain on the muscle you're trying to work out. Although both styles of training have the weight going from point A to B, the difference between this guy and this guy is that the guy who's lifting weights with the goal of building muscle is purposely trying to make that exercise harder, so that I'm going to pick up my dumbbell for the 100th time, right? If I'm curling, I'm not just going to drop the weight down. If I'm curling with the objective to complete a rep and lift this weight, I'm going to use all the momentum I possibly can to get that weight up. But if I'm trying to target my biceps, then I want to be lifting with control all the way through the movement. You want to make sure that you're putting tension on the muscle. And I want to disclose this really quickly. If you are new to the gym, which if you're watching this, I take it that you don't have decades of experience. If you're relatively new, you probably won't feel a lot of tension or strain on the muscle when you're first starting out. And the reason for that is because there's not a lot of muscle there, right? If you're trying to build a physique, you don't have much muscle to stand on to begin with. So you might not feel the tension, you might not feel the strain when you're first starting. But if you're lifting with that kind of intensity, that training to failure that we talked about earlier, and you're pushing yourself and really trying to control that weight, over time, your ability to feel tension on the muscle will improve, I promise. What I'd prefer not to see is that you're lifting for the purpose of getting a rep, hitting a certain number or PR. That's all great stuff. I'm not against that at all. I'm just saying in the specific context of trying to build muscle, you're lifting with control, with more intensity. You will be training harder than somebody like this because it is harder to control the heavy weights rather than just move them from point A to B. And in case this wasn't already obvious, if you are lifting with the goal of building muscle, you're lifting with control, by default, you're going to be lifting lighter than the same guy who is trying to move the weight from point A to B. And this doesn't mean you're chicken shit. It doesn't mean you're not going to amount to anything, that you're a failure in life. You're just lifting with a goal that is not the same as this. And that's okay. So if anybody gives you heck for if they're curling the 100s and you're curling the 85s, it doesn't mean that you suck at everything. It's just that you're training more intensely than they are. And therefore, with more control, with more focus on the tension, you're going to have to use lighter weight. It's just how it goes. Point number 3, warm up. Always. This is not a joke. It's not a recommendation. It's a very simple rule that a lot of guys don't follow, and is one of the major reasons why they get injured, and injured very badly. So how do we warm up? There's a billion different ways that you can warm up, but the personal favorite of mine and the ones I use for my clients is with a resistance band and the exercise itself. So resistance band, pretty obvious. It's a rubber band kind of shaped like that. Use it, stretch out your shoulders, your triceps, anything that you're trying to train. That is what you are warming up. The exercise itself, this is a bit more information heavy. Typically, you want to be doing multiple sets with lighter weight. So what does multiple sets with lighter weight look like? Is there a specific amount of weight you're trying to lift? No, I just have general rules of thumb of the kind of weight that I'm trying to move. So let's just say, I'll use an easy example, the pec deck machine, where you sit down and you're closing in, you're trying to work your chest. I personally use 180 pounds, let's just say. When I go into the gym, I'm not going to start with 180 pounds. That's pretty stupid, and the likelihood that I get injured is significantly higher. So that's not the right play. So let's just say I do 180. I might opt for a lighter weight. Maybe I start with 70 and I do 12 to 15 reps. Then I might move to 130. I might do 7 reps, then 160. Might do 2 reps. And I personally do this. I don't think this is talked about enough. My last warm-up set, at least on my first few exercises, is with the weight I'm going to use. And so if I'm doing the pec deck and I fail between 10 and 12 reps, doing 1 rep as a final warm-up set doesn't really hurt you all that much. But if you're doing like squats and you're doing like sets of 2 or 3, 1 rep is half of that. So you can't really use the same logic there. This is just for exercises that you're doing higher reps on. And so I'll actually warm up with the weight I'm using itself. But here you'll notice the progression. As I'm adding more weight, the amount of reps I'm doing goes down. I repeat this process until I end up at my working weight. You don't have to do this. I just do this because I personally don't like to go from 160 as my final working set right into 180, which is significantly heavier. So if I'm doing many reps, then I'll just do the 1 last rep, which we call this is called a feeler set. You just want to feel out the weight. as you're increasing weight, the amount of reps you're doing decreases. You don't have to follow this exact rep scheme. I'm just saying warm up until the muscle you're trying to train is ready to go. Before I go into anything else, I want to make a quick point about body weight exercises. I'll put BW here. When you're doing a body weight exercise, think of a pull-up, a dip, maybe push-ups, but mainly pull-ups and dips is what I'm referring to here. You're not going to just do the exercise. So let's just say pull-ups is your first exercise on your back day. You're not just going to go up to the bar and start warming up with pull-ups when you're already doing pull-ups, because that'd be the same as going to the pec deck and doing 180 pounds, right? You're lifting your entire body weight on your first set. Doesn't make sense. And so the likelihood that you get injured is much higher. You'd probably want to warm up with equipment that targets the same muscle, or with the assisted pull-up machine, or something that makes it easier. For me, I like to warm up, if I'm doing pull-ups, I like to warm up with lat pull-downs. Lat pull-downs target a pretty similar area of the back. Instead of just going right into the pull-ups and doing my warm-up set, it just doesn't make any sense. But since bodyweight exercises are seen as different from machine or barbell work, people just kind of go right into it. So just letting you know before you start doing intense exercise, or if you're already doing intense exercise, warm up with bodyweight exercises the same way you would with anything else. And that could be with lighter weights, assisted machines, or machines that target the same muscles. Okay, and one more point I want to make about this is that you want to warm up the muscles that surround it. If I'm training my chest and I'm doing a bench press, I don't want to just warm up my chest, because there's a lot of other body parts that go into a bench press. There's your triceps, your shoulders, your wrists, your forearms, your lower back, your upper back. There's a bunch of different things that you probably should have dialed in before you do a big exercise. And the more muscles that are required for that exercise, probably the more warm up you have to do. You don't have to do like 4 sets for your triceps, your chest, no. I'm just saying, don't go in with the idea that you just have to stretch out your chest if you're using multiple other muscle groups. And so you can use common sense here to delineate which muscles you're trying to train. If you're training your back with a barbell row, you're bent over and you're rowing the weight, right? We're rowing the weight. I probably want to warm up my forearms or my biceps or my hamstrings if I'm bent over. Again, I'm just trying to help you prevent injury. This isn't something you have to be super nitpicky about or obsess over. I'm just saying, if you're doing a back exercise where your biceps are fully stretched and partially contracted, that you might want to warm them up. And this is where the rubber band comes in, because you can do some curls with it. You can stretch it over your shoulder. You can do whatever you need to do with the band. So I recommend both. Again, I probably don't have to go this deep into warming up. You likely understand what I'm saying, but I just rather you have enough information to take action rather than have a billion questions. I like answering comments. I don't like it that much. All right. Point number 4, go hard and then optimize. Do not mix this order. You don't want to optimize first and then go hard. The biggest driver of building muscle when you're working out is the intensity of your training. If you are not pushing your sets remotely close to failure and you're not getting that kind of control where you can feel the muscle, it's pretty hard to friggin' build muscle. So we want to focus on training hard. I'd rather you listen to none of this information about working out and just focus on going hard and not using a ton of momentum to lift the weight than try to be like Mr. Science, like try to get everything right and get all the little details. If you were to think of this like a painting, right? Let's just say we have the painting and we have some rocks, we have some water, maybe we have like a sky or a cloud up here. People focus on all these little details in the corner, but they forget the big freaking Mona Lisa right in the middle. This is intensity. This is the small details of the intricacies of training. What I want you to focus on, this Mona Lisa, is intensity. If you don't have this, nothing else matters. There's not really much else I have to say on this, and I really prefer that you don't learn the hard way, because the reality is, if you don't have results that other people have applauded you for, then you probably shouldn't try to be a perfect little snowflake about the details. I'm all for this. I'm all for optimizing and doing better. But if you're missing this, you're standing on nothing. It's a foundation of sand. So make sure that you're going hard. And I know I didn't talk about exercise selection and all this fancy dancy stuff, but I do have something that will cover that, and that is free training programs. Should have put an S here. And over the past 4 years, I've accrued a large amount of training tips, of training styles, of splits, all this stuff. And I have custom training programs for everything. So if you're trying to train 2 times a week, 3 times a week, 4 times a week, you're looking for what exercises, target which muscle groups, I have custom training programs that people would typically charge for, but I'm going to give it away completely free. And so if that interests you, you can go to theincrediblebulk.ca/training, and I'll have everything listed out for there. You pick out the kind of training program you want, send me the details, and then I will personally send you back the training program for free. So if that interests you, you can go check it out. All right, we got training and the basic principles out of the way, and now I'm going to move to diet. This is going to be food 101. So here I also have 4 basic principles that we can follow. And the first one is the amount of calories that you need to be eating over a specific period of time must be more than the amount of calories you are burning. And by a specific period of time, I could mean a day, a week, a month. Let's just use days for example, because it's easier. If you need 2,000 calories to maintain your current weight, anything over that number, you will gain weight. Anything eaten below that number, you will lose weight, right? This would be known as a calorie surplus. This would be known as a calorie deficit, but you already knew that. So in order to put on more tissue, we're trying to put size onto our body, create something from nothing, essentially. We're going to need a calorie surplus. And what does that mean? We will need more fuel to have more size, right? If you're driving a bigger car, you're probably going to have a bigger gas tank in most cases. So we're going to need more food than we're burning off. And I guess there's 2 questions that arise from this point. How many calories do we need to maintain our weight? What's our baseline? And how many calories do we need to grow? I'll answer this one first. So the number we're trying to find is called our maintenance calories. You've probably heard of this before, but essentially it is the amount of calories needed to keep you at your current weight, not to increase you, not to decrease you, to keep you right where you are. So if you're a 150-pound guy watching this and you need 2,000 calories a day, like I said, anything above that number, you'll gain weight. Anything below, you'll lose weight. So how do we calculate this? The first step to finding your maintenance calories is to go to the internet, Google. Then you will search up calorie calculator. You just search those 2 words, calorie calculator. You click the first website you see, and then you're going to enter your stats. That would be your height, your weight, your age, your activity level. These are the things they're going to ask you. Try to be as accurate as possible with your stats, because if you give it wrong numbers, it's going to give you a wrong amount of calories. And then you're going to click calculate and eat that amount of calories per day. So it might say you need 2,500 calories to maintain your weight. Eat that amount of calories. And what you can do is try this for a week. Try for 7 days and weigh yourself before you start. Then eat that amount of calories for 7 days. And then weigh yourself when it ends. And so let's just say you weigh yourself at 150 pounds, and by the end of the week, you are 151 pounds. That amount of calories is going to be a good starting point for you to bulk. But in most cases, you'll probably be around the same weight. You'll probably end up still at 150, or you might just be like 0.2 pounds off, something small like that. Either way, if your weight is the same by the end of this week, then you know that that number that the calorie calculator gave you is your maintenance calories. If your weight goes up, then that's a good sign that this is the amount of calories you can start bulking off of. And if your weight goes down, like considerably, if you go from 150 and you end up at 148, then you know that this amount of calories is too little. So no matter how many times your aunt might say that it's your hyperthyroidismosis, it is just a numbers game at the end of the day. Now, the quality of your foods matters, of course, and we'll talk about that shortly. But in the specific realm of gaining and losing weight, just those 2 things, not health, not fitness, not your cardio, not your 1-rep max, gaining and losing weight, it is all numbers. Okay, so you know how to maintain your calories. You know the amount of calories you need to maintain your weight. How many do we need to grow? Because that is our objective here. We're trying to grow. Well, for 99.999999% of people, it's going to be 300 to 700 calories over your maintenance. If you have a 2,500 calorie maintenance, that might look like 2,800 calories or 32. The number you pick within this range is dependent on you. If you were to ask me, and you're kind of in the middle, you're not sure which one you want to start with, I would err in the middle to this side. Because the reasoning for this, the reason why I went as high as 700 calories is because some guys are just obscenely skinny. They are very skinny, they're very lean, and they desperately need to put on weight. This is for guys that are suffering from an ED. Maybe they're anorexic, or they're recovering from cancer, or they're an athlete and they need those extra calories, or somebody who wants to really gain weight fast for some specific reason. But if you're just trying to build muscle and you're trying to build lean muscle and limit the fat, I would err on the left side. 300, 500 calorie surplus is a great place to start. Could you start with 1,000? Yes, I don't recommend it. My first ever bulk, I went from 2,500 calories a day to 4,500 calories a day. And you can see that I'm almost doubling my food intake overnight. Not a good idea. I was pooping like 6 times a day and felt bloated 24/7. Brutal acne, sadness, and eventually some unwanted fat gain. So don't do that. And if you're wondering what's going to happen after your weight plateaus, how do you keep growing once your progress comes to a halt, I'm going to cover all that towards the end of the video. But for right now, maintenance calories through a calorie calculator, and then just eat 300 to 700 over that, depending on who you are. The second thing that I want to cover, at least at its base level, is macros, macronutrients. Now, you've probably heard this term before, but essentially there are 4 that you should know about. And those are carbohydrates, protein, fat, and alcohol. But I guess this doesn't really contribute to a healthy diet, so we'll get rid of that because alcohol is not really necessary. We have 3. I'm going to explain the basic functions of each, where and when they should be included in your diet, and what kind of foods contain high levels of each. That way you know which ones to put in your diet. We're starting with carbs, and there's 6 super quick points that I want to get through. First, carbs are quick energy for the most part. There's different types of carbs you can eat, but if you're looking for something that's going to give you energy and can be used as fuel first and fast, that is what we want. There's multiple types of carbohydrates, but the 2 main ones you have to worry about are simple and complex. You probably heard these before. The main difference that I can say in one sentence between these 2 is that simple carbohydrates give you energy quicker and they burn out faster, and complex carbohydrates give you energy slower, but it lasts longer throughout the day. Regardless of the carbs that you're taking in, it is usually going to be your body's first choice of fuel in exercise. And I'm talking exercise as in lifting weights, trying to build muscle. Because if you're lifting weights and trying to build muscle, that is an activity that is quick and very intense. And so the body will resort to carbohydrates as its first fuel choice. The brain also runs on carbohydrates. So do your muscles. So it would make sense, therefore, that carbs are good for gains. No matter what your mom or your aunt said about the Instagram reels that they saw, carbs are good for gains. And so that is something that you want to load up on. And if you ask me, I think a bulk is the perfect time to have sweets. And by sweets, I mean something that you normally cheat with, like juice, maybe a muffin, a donut, candy, chocolate, etc. And not like a disgusting mukbang. I mean, we're eating in moderation. And the best time to have these sweets and have these carbs, and I'm not just talking dessert, I'm talking carbs in general, is before and right after your workout. The reason that you'd want to have your carbs before your workout is because you want to get that simple, quick energy so that your body has fuel in order to use for the lift. And the reason why you'd want to have them right after your workout is because when you're training, your body is using primarily carbs as its fuel source. So by the end of the workout, guess what you're short on? Carbs. Therefore, you'd want carbs that can be absorbed and digested quickly. Simple and complex carbs is going to be your best bet when you're having a post-workout meal. You want to have some protein in there as well, and then we'll talk about how to actually construct one of these meals. Finally, carbs are really easy to eat. It's pretty easy to down some fries and a burger. It's pretty easy to eat muffins, donuts. You probably had a donut at some point and figured you could eat 10 more of them. Therefore, it makes sense to have a good amount of them. How many carbs should you be eating a day? Well, that depends on the person, but a good rule of thumb is 50 to 60% of your calories should probably be coming from carbs. And if you're lifting weights that day, if this is a day that you're working out, if you're working out 4 days out of the week, then 4 days out of the week, you'd probably want to be towards the higher end of this range because you want to have more carbs for your workouts. But for most people, 50 to 60% is good. And I want to make a quick note about why you'd want to have a lot of carbs is because when you're bulking up, you have the opportunity to eat more food, more calories, right? And so you will have more carbs. Since this is your body's first choice of fuel, it now spares your body from having to resort to protein or fat for energy. And since we know that protein builds muscle, we want to have enough carbs in our system that our body uses this instead of what's needed to build muscle. Because if we're relying off protein for our main source of energy, then you have less of it devoted to muscle growth. And that is a no bueno. We don't want that. So, in other words, carbs are what you call protein sparing. They save the life of your protein intake. That way you can use the carbs to fuel your lifts. So carbs are very important. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. The next one I'm going to cover is fat. To me, fat is the most underutilized and underappreciated macronutrient because everybody knows carbs gives you energy and we know that protein builds muscle. But what does fat do? Well, it's actually pretty important. So first, fat is the long energy. If you think of a hiker or someone who's doing some sort of endurance sport, ideally they're going to be consuming more fat than the average person. Especially if you're walking up a mountain, you'll typically see these guys have like nuts or trail mix. Those foods are high in fat. The reason they have these foods is because it releases energy slowly over a very long period of time. And so it makes sense that if you are lifting weights, something that is quick and intense, it's probably not the best choice to have a lot of pre and post workout. Now, that doesn't mean that you should skip fat altogether. If you are missing out on fat, then you are missing out on the production of key sex hormones. And I don't mean sex as in having sex. I mean sex hormones like testosterone, estrogen, cortisol, and something else that's important, right? If we're not eating enough fat, then we are missing out on producing testosterone and keeping our testosterone levels at a stable level. And some guys, when they're dieting down, they'll cut their fat intake to a level that's too low. And so they will experience all the symptoms of low testosterone. They'll have mood swings, acne, erectile dysfunction, potentially not really building muscle, all these different things, problems that arise. So we need to keep our fat levels stable. Next, I guess these two kind of line up. They're pretty much the same thing. So if you were to look at the amount of calories per 1 gram of each macronutrient, for 1 gram of carbs, there's 4 calories. 4 calories per gram of protein, but 9 calories per gram of fat. And so if you're using your brain, you can eat foods that have higher calories, and it's going to be a lot easier than eating a lot of protein. In most cases, a lot of carbs as well. So if you're looking to have foods that are higher calories for the same amount of food, you might want to opt for more fat-containing foods. And I'm going to write out all the different foods that we can be eating on a bulk in a minute, but essentially we're able to take in more calories, more than double, for the same amount. So with these extra calories, it would probably make sense that foods that are high in fat are naturally more filling. The question is the trade-off worth it to have more calories for more filling foods? That's a decision for you to make. But ideally, you don't want to be eating them close to or at least right before and right after your workout. So for example, you're eating 5 meals a day and your workout is between meal 3 and 4. It would make sense not to have a lot of fat in these meals, but you can always load up right here. And the amount of fat that you need per meal is strictly dependent on how many calories you're taking in. But if you want a rough idea, 15 to 20% of your calories should be coming from fat. If you're going over 20%, like significantly over, if we're talking 30, 40%, then you're running into issues where you have to cram so much fat and not have much here. So these meals are going to be insanely high in fat, we don't want that because it's slow energy. It's going to take a long time to digest. Bunch of problems there. But if you're going significantly below 15%, then we run into the hormone issues. So for a good range that'll help almost every guy, 15 to 20% is a pretty strong place to start. You can always adjust later. Finally, we're going to talk about protein. Of course, we know it builds muscle. I don't need to explain that at all. A very common question is, how do I know if I'm getting too much or not enough? I can explain that using a water bottle. So if I'm drinking my water, right, I have my water here and I drink it. If I'm drinking any more than what is required for my body to be hydrated, where do you think the rest of the water goes? You pee it out, right? So if you're drinking too much water, then the rest of it's just going to go straight into the toilet. The same goes with protein. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to poop out everything, but it gets to the point where you have the amount that you need to build muscle, and then you eat this amount. Anything over this amount isn't really that useful anymore. So it just gets converted like any other calorie to stored energy, like fat, or you poop it out. After a certain point, this point is different for everybody. Protein just becomes yet another calorie or another source of fuel. And so you want to have enough to where you're building muscle, and that is all. That is all we care about. What is that number? Well, a good rule of thumb that you've probably heard of before is 1 gram per pound of body weight. 1 gram per pound. So if you're a 150-pound guy, you'll probably have 150 grams of protein a day. And you can space that out amongst your meals. So we're eating 5 meals a day, let's just say. You might be eating 4, you might be eating 6. I'll cover that in just a moment. Typically, you try to space it evenly across these 5 meals. Maybe you want to have a little bit more at the start of the day. Maybe you want to have a little bit less at the end of the day because it takes a longer time to digest protein than it does carbs. And so you might want to have more at the start, less towards the end. And you want to keep it pretty much regular for your middle day meals. Do you need protein powder to build muscle? No. Protein powder is just food that is high in protein condensed into dust, into powder. And so protein powder does not equate to muscle growth. It's just a more convenient way to get in protein. If you want to drink a shake, you can mix the protein powder with pretty much anything. Make shakes, you can make oats with it, you can make recipes, muffins, all these different things. It's useful there, but it's not necessary. And like I said, the pre and post workout, we'll try to keep it at a normal level. So if you're eating 150 grams a day across 5 meals, then that would be 30-ish grams per meal. Like I said, you can eat more at the start of the day and less at the end, but for the most part, you want to keep it even. All that matters really is that you're getting in enough protein, and a good target when you're bulking up is 1 gram per pound of body weight. And everything that we just covered is macros. So a short little lesson as to which ones do what, so you know what kind of foods to eat. Speaking of which, the next point that I'm going to cover are the foods that help you train well. Look, there's different foods for every kind of person, and so I'm going to leave a screenshot on the board of my personal favorites, some that are high in protein, high in carbs, high in fat. And so these are some that you can use to make your first meal structure. But you want foods that are going to do a few things for you. You want foods that are going to digest easily because you don't want to be sitting with a full gut, and you don't want to make your workouts uncomfortable, essentially. Lifting weights can already be challenging on its own, especially if you're already tired, if you got a busy day. You don't want to have to deal with a full bulging stomach. So you want to make sure you have foods that digest. You want to make sure that you're eating these foods on time, right? If you have 5 meals a day, you ideally want to space them out enough so that you give your body time to digest. Because if you don't, and you have to cram 2 meals together at once, not that comfortable, especially the more food that you're eating, the less time you have in between each meal. So you want to make sure that you're eating on time. As for the amount of meals that you should probably be eating during a day, I'd say anywhere from 3 to 6. The reason I don't say have more than 6 is because you'd probably be eating every 90 minutes, and that's not realistic. And if you're having less than 3, well, if you're having 2 meals a day and you're eating 4,000 calories, those are some pretty big meals. And so it's nice to space them out. The thing is, when you have less meals, you have more time to space them out, but they're going to be bigger. When you have more meals, you have less time to space them out, but they'll usually be smaller. And so you can pick your poison. I personally do 5 meals a day. Some of my clients do 4, some of them do 5. I typically don't go to 6 unless I'm really gassing it or I just want to eat smaller meals. But yeah, for me, 5 meals a day has been really good. So the choice you make there is up to you. But I'll leave the screenshot up here once again if you wanted to take a picture of it. Just some good foods that can start you off. The fourth and final point is the difference between clean bulking and dirty bulking. And depending on who you are and what your goals are, of course, you're trying to get bigger if you're watching this video, but depending on what the actual goal is, are we trying to accrue lean muscle mass? Are we just trying to put on weight? I'm going to cover some basic points about both. That way you can pick which one works best for you. When you're doing, quote, a dirty bulk, what does that mean? Well, typically it means you're going to be having a higher calorie surplus than you would with a clean bulk. So earlier I mentioned that 300 to 700 calorie surplus range. A dirty bulk would be airing in the middle to this side. And honestly, most people do higher surpluses than 700. You could expect to see 1,000 calorie surpluses. That's where it gets into the kind of extreme range because, like I said, if you're eating thousands of calories over what's actually needed, your body's just going to store those extra calories as storage for later. And that's also known as body fat. So you want to be careful with how dirty you're bulking, because if you're just eating everything in sight and trying to pound as much food as possible, I want to say one thing in response to that. The goal of a bulk is to build muscle. More specifically, it is to accelerate the process of building muscle, because you could build muscle at a maintenance level of calories, but it is faster if you're eating more calories. And in a dirty bulk, you will build muscle. This is true. It's just that if you're eating too many calories, then you get to the point of diminishing returns where the amount of fat you gain outpaces the amount of muscle you're gaining. And so then it becomes basically useless because we're not trying to put on fat, we're trying to put on muscle. So I think a dirty bulk works. I think a dirty bulk absolutely works, especially for your first time around. And if you've never bulked before and you're really skinny and you desperately need to put on weight, we talked about those kind of people earlier. But if it gets to the point where you're force feeding thousands of extra calories, you're eating crappy foods, I don't know. That's something you have to use your own judgment on. For the most part, I'd suggest almost everybody would benefit from a 300 to 500 calorie surplus. When you're pushing 700, 1,000, even more, then it just gets very problematic. I also want to talk about the, freedom of choice in terms of the foods that you're eating. So a good rule, I'll write the clean bulk rule number 1 here. A good rule for a clean bulk is having 80% of your foods come from whole foods, good food sources, and 20% you can be a little bit free with what you do. When you're doing a dirty bulk, it's more like 50-50. And so if we're comparing these two side by side, you're experiencing a lot more of your calories coming from not great foods, crappy foods, right? What do you think is going to happen if you're eating a bunch of crappy foods? Well, your body's going to reflect that, and it's going to reflect that in multiple ways. You will experience increased levels of acne, worse digestion, you'll get bloated faster, and of course, the added fat gain that we talked about earlier if you're eating too many calories. And a real quick point in case you're wondering, let's just say you're eating 3,000 calories a day on a clean bulk and 3,000 calories a day on a dirty bulk. We have our 80-20 rule for clean, 50-50 for dirty. Even though you're eating the same amount of calories, so theoretically you wouldn't get more fat, your body is going to perform significantly worse off of this. And so that's a choice you have to make. And don't get me wrong, I've dirty bulked before, and it is much easier to get those calories in because for the most part, you're going to be eating crappier foods. And crappier foods are easier to eat because they taste good. But the question you have to ask yourself is, am I willing to sacrifice or accrue these things in order to have an easier time eating on my bulk? Which is why, again, I suggest 300 to 500 calorie surplus so you don't have to eat that many calories. But I digress. I just want to talk about the dangers, or potential risks that you take on when having crappy food. The third point I want to talk about is that it is usually more expensive. And this sounds a bit counterintuitive because you might think, well, if I'm eating clean whole foods, like if I'm eating chicken, vegetables, beef, rice, whatever, these clean foods that most people would consider good, those are going to be more expensive. But for the most part, that's not true. If you're buying dirtier foods, which would typically be like fast foods, you can expect to spend $12 to $15 a meal. I don't know about you, but when I coach my guys one-on-one, they eat for $15 a day. They eat all of their meals for $15 a day. And so that's cheaper than one Big Mac combo at McDonald's. I know this from personal experience because I used to think the same thing. I thought this was much cheaper, but that is just not true. People are only saying that because they either don't understand or they just haven't tried eating clean and are not able to budget for it. They don't understand how to meal prep. They don't understand how to save time while cooking. And that is something that I will cover in another video. But if you're picking between these two bulks, this one's going to be more expensive every single time. So let's talk about clean bulking. So we already know that a clean bulk will mean us having more clean than dirty foods. The next point I want to make is the fact that you're going to gain much slower, like considerably slower. But this isn't really a bad thing. I consider slow gains good gains. As long as they're not like super slow gains, but if you're gaining between 0.5 and 1.2 pounds per week, that is a pretty solid bulk. But if you're going over this number and you're gaining like 2-3 pounds, it doesn't matter if you're eating healthy food, you're eating so many calories that I would consider that a dirty bulk. Even if you're eating vegetables, fruits, all your good stuff, if you're gaining a lot more than 1.2 pounds per week, that's probably not ideal. And the really neat thing about a clean or lean bulk is the fact that if you're getting slow gains, almost all of those gains are strictly muscle tissue or lean tissue. And so, if you understand a little bit about the dieting process, that would mean that you probably won't have to do a big cut at the end. Now, in most cases, if you're running a dirty bulk, you're going to be eating at a higher calorie surplus. You're going to be eating dirtier food, spending more money doing all this stuff. But at the end, like I said, you will end up with more muscle than this guy, except the fat gain that you gain on a dirty bulk will be significantly higher. And so when you decide to cut that fat down, guess what you're also cutting? Muscle. So at the end of the day, doesn't really matter. The idea is if you can dirty bulk and still stay lean, that's awesome. But 9 times out of 10, guys don't know when to stop. But if we were to do a clean or lean bulk, we probably wouldn't build as much muscle, but we get pretty darn close and in the end, not gain as much fat. And so when we decide to limit the amount of calories we're eating, because we're not going to eat in a calorie surplus forever, eventually we'll back down, then the weight that we lose is going to be predominantly fat. It's also easier to diet down. Like if you choose to cut at the end of a bulk, it's much easier to cut down because you're used to eating the healthy foods. But if you're going from Big Macs and ice cream and a bunch of junk food, and then you have to make a complete 180 cold turkey switch to healthy foods because you're going to have to eat low calories when you're cutting down, then it's much harder to make that adjustment. But if you're eating healthy year round, this is a whole lot easier. And of course, if I didn't already say it, a clean bulk is always going to be cheaper because you're buying less food, you're buying less calories, and the calories you are buying are whole foods that can be meal prepped and aren't nearly as expensive as fast foods are. So you can look at this board, and this isn't me crapping on dirty bulking at all. I think it absolutely works. It's just that so many guys think bulking means we're trying to put on as much weight on the scale, and that is simply not true. For the last time, the goal is to speed up the growth of muscle mass. And so if you're eating in a 300 to 500 calorie surplus, that is going to be the golden range for starting a clean bulk. Everything we've covered in this video that has to do with food will give you all the information you need to start progressing pretty much immediately. And so I'm not going to go into the minutia or the small optimizations you have to make to be perfect with food. The reality is you just need a calorie surplus every single day, and you need to know which foods help you hit that calorie surplus easier. And so we've covered those things. The lesson on macros that I gave earlier, and then the difference between the clean and dirty bulk, that's just to help you light the path a little bit better so you know where you're stepping and you don't make the same beginner mistakes that I did. And so with the information we covered on food, you'll be able to take all of this and start applying it to your own life to make progress literally right now. But we still got a bit of video left, so I want to talk about tracking metrics because we can't just eat more food and do workouts. We have to actually know what's going on with the numbers. So let's cover that. If you can't already tell, I am someone who does not like to leave things to chance. And so there are 3 main metrics that I track for myself and my clients when we are trying to pack on serious amounts of muscle. And those 3 things are calories, measurements, and lifts. And I'm going to cover each of these and show you exactly how to do all 3 so that you can start tracking progress. But there's a quick note that I want to make. The more metrics that you track, the more control you have over your progress. I'll show you an example. I have a basketball, right? And so let's just say I'm in the gym and I go to take a shot, but now the lights are off in the gym and I can't see the hoop. What is the likelihood that I make that shot? Pretty low. Okay, now we turn the lights off in the gym and I spin around 5 times. So now I have no vision and I have no idea where the hoop is because I spun around a bunch. Likelihood that I hit that shot, pretty low. Okay, what if I do all that stuff and then I shoot with my opposite hand? Much lower, right? So the less things you account for, the lower your percentage of success. And it would make sense that the more supervision that you have on the metrics of your progress, the easier it is to win. A lot of guys that go to the gym are against tracking these things, and that's perfectly fine because they're not very serious about seeing progress. But George, what about the guys who are super jacked and they don't track any of these things? I understand there are anomalies that exist. There are people who don't give a damn about anything and still make crazier gains than me even. But they are them. You are you. You are not them. And so, if you're trying to maximize the probability of success, I would say give at least one of these a shot. And so we'll cover all 3. The first and arguably the most important metric that we want to keep track of is our calorie count. So we already know the process of getting to our maintenance number. We already know what this number is. For you, it could be 2,000, 3,000, 2,500, whatever. But how do we get there? And how do we calculate this every single day? I'm going to break this down in 4 simple steps. The first step to tracking your calories is to put an empty dish on the food scale. So a dish could be an empty bowl, a glass, a plate, whatever you're putting the food inside of or on, put that on the food scale. Next, you're going to add whatever food or drink you're consuming. And by the way, if you're eating multiple foods in the same bowl, so let's just say you have your chicken, your beef, your rice, and your vegetables, measure chicken, beef, rice, and vegetables individually. And so you'll have to reset the scale to do so. But every time you add something to the dish on the food scale, it is going to read back a number. So let's just say it reads back 100 grams. Once we have the number listed on the scale, we're going to go in our calorie tracking app, and then we are going to search the food. So let's just say this 100 grams is from our chicken thighs. I'm going to search up chicken thighs in my calorie tracking app. And then what's going to happen is it's going to show me chicken thighs. I'm going to enter in 100 grams because that's how much I'm eating. And it's going to return to me all the calories, all the macros, all the micronutrients, everything that we need to know about this 100 grams of chicken thighs. It's going to log it in for me for the day. The fourth and final step, I'm going to write up top because I have no room left, is to repeat that action, step 1, 2, and 3, for every single food that you eat during the day, for every single day until you get jacked or until you want to stop tracking your calories, which I recommend never stopping, because why would you want to have less authority over your progress? You put the empty dish on the food scale, add your food or drink, log it in the app, and then do that for every single food. Like I said, if you're going to be eating multiple foods in the same bowl, then you'll want to track each of these foods individually, because you can't just say, I have 723 grams of what? There's multiple foods in there. And so each food has different calories, each food has different macros. You'll have to reset it. On most scales, there's going to be a button that says tare, or it's going to be a T, T-A-R-E. That just means resetting the scale to 0. So you can hit this button. That way you don't have to turn the scale off and on every single time you want to add a new food. I want to cover some common mistakes that I've personally made and that I see others making when it comes to tracking calories. This one is a huge mistake, not knowing the difference between the raw and cooked weights of your food. So let's use the chicken thighs example again at 100 grams. When you're cooking foods, mainly frying them, boiling them, heating them up, whatever, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio of weight between raw and cooked. There's a difference. And so when you're cooking raw and cooked foods, you will lose a good amount of weight due to water, steam, fat, etc. What happens with chicken thighs, there's about a 30% loss in overall weight on average when you're cooking them. So that 100 grams goes to 70. The problem with this is that people, myself included, I've made this mistake before, people will track 100 grams in their app and just think that they ate 100 grams of cooked chicken, but that's not true. They ate 70 grams. So what they do is they overestimate how many calories they're eating. And if you're trying to bulk up, if you're trying to hit a certain amount of calories, let's just say you're trying to hit 3,000 calories a day. If you're overestimating how much food you're eating, then you might be way under. You might be at 2,200 even though you think you're at 3,000 because you tracked it. But just because you tracked it doesn't mean it's actually properly accounted for. So that 100 grams raw gets cooked into 70 grams of cooked or edible chicken. But if you're tracking it as 100 grams cooked, that's incorrect. You're actually eating 70 grams. So make sure you know the difference between your raw and cooked food weights. I'll run through some basic foods just so you know which ones to look out for. We'll start with chicken thighs. We already know chicken thighs have a 30% loss on average. Ground beef is about the same. And the leaner the ground beef, the less amount of weight you'll use. So if you're getting like extra lean ground beef, you might lose 20 to 25%. If you're cooking pasta, it's the opposite. So if you're cooking pasta or rice, this actually increases in size. And so pasta on average will 2.35x in size. So let's just say you have 85 grams of raw pasta. That gets cooked because of the added water weight, but since there's no calories in water, that extra weight, there's 0 calories in it. And so if you 2.35x 85 grams, you end up with 200 grams cooked. And what'll happen is, if you have a box of pasta, here's our nutritional facts label. And on the nutritional facts label on the box, they will say for every 85 grams, there's 300 calories, which is all good and well, except that 85 grams is the raw that they're referring to. They're not referring to cooked. And so there's actually 200 grams for 300 calories. And so pasta is 2.35x. And if we're talking about white rice, that will on average 3x in size. So white rice and pasta follow pretty much the same rule. If the box of white rice says for every 90 grams, you're eating 160 calories, that's not really true. For every 90 grams raw of white rice, you're eating 160 calories. But when you're cooking it, that would equate to 270. So you'd have to eat 270 grams of cooked white rice to get 160 calories. And finally, frozen veggies, since they're frozen, they have a little bit of water in them and then they lose some of that weight. On average, they'll lose about 15% of the weight when you cook them. So if you're looking at raw meats or some sort of frozen vegetables, these are going to lose weight when you're cooking them. And so you might overestimate the amount of calories that are inside them and therefore not eat enough. But if you're cooking foods like pasta and rice, things that you boil water with, these foods are going to accumulate and attract the water to the food. So those foods would grow in weight. And sometimes they'll be multiplying by 2 to 3x. So you really have to watch out. And once again, if you're overestimating how many calories you're eating, then you're under eating the amount of calories you actually need, and therefore you're not growing. So this is a pretty big mistake that trips up most guys, myself included. I made this mistake for years. So just something to look out for. And something else I notice is that when guys are tracking calories, they're just going to estimate how much food or how many calories is in a certain amount of food. And if you want a real world example, a lot of guys, even guys that are like super into the fitness space, they'll measure with cups, they'll measure with tablespoons, with scoops. These are what you call volumetric measurements. So these are like estimates. They're tools that you use to measure things out rather than a scale that gives you the exact grams. And so if you're measuring with this, sometimes when you have food in a cup, you could have a heaping scoop. And so all this extra food up top is not accounted for when you say 1 cup. Or you could be underestimating. You could have the cup 3/4 away full and still call it 1 cup or 1 scoop or 1 tablespoon. But if you're weighing things out on a scale, then it's going to read out the exact measurement. I recommend measuring in grams because I'm Canadian, but it's going to read out the exact grams rather than 1 cup. Personally, if you're trying to improve your diet, track your calories, I wouldn't stop 3/4 of the way and do these volumetric measurements because you can be pretty inaccurate if you don't get it to the exact level every single time. And so if you start with a food scale and you get the actual grams, then you never really miss. And so if you do this for enough time, over time, you will develop an intuition around food. And this isn't some like mythical superpower that people have. You'll just know off the top of your head when you track 1 tablespoon of peanut butter, it's 90 calories, or 1 scoop of protein powder is 31 grams. These things you'll just know with experience. But when you're first starting out, I recommend getting a scale. That way you don't have to estimate and get it wrong. And so this is a really small detail, but that could be the difference between you making it and not making it to your calorie goal. And so this gap of the calories that you would have missed if you were tracking with cups and you didn't have enough food in the cup for it to be considered 1 cup, that could be the difference between where you are and where you want to go. So like I said, if you're going to go all the way and try to track your calories and try to get things right, you may as well go 100%. Some of the most important metrics you'll ever track is your measurements. Now, what do I mean by measurements? Well, those are the actual physical stats of your body. And so there are 3 that I want to focus on: your body weight, the circumference of your waist, and the size of each of your muscles. And so from top to bottom is what's going to grow the fastest. So your weight is going to grow quicker than anything else. Then your waist might climb up. And then finally, if you're lucky, the size of your muscles will increase. And so we want to keep track of all 3 of these so that we know what's going on with our body, how our body is responding to everything that we're doing. And so I'll show you how to track all 3, starting with your body weight. And to track your weight, you want to do it first thing in the morning. So you'll wake up, go straight to the bathroom, don't drink any fluids, don't eat any food. You're going to pee, you're going to poop, more specifically poop, and then you're going to step on the scale with no clothes on. You're not wearing your jeans, you're not wearing your shoes, because we're not trying to weigh anything else except our body. You're going to weigh in. It is going to read a number back to you. Let's just say it says 150 pounds. Then you're just going to track it on a piece of paper in the Notes app on your phone or with a calorie tracking app. Most calorie tracking apps have a weight logger. That's literally it. Next, I want to talk about the waist, and more specifically, the circumference, the size around the waist. What will happen is the objective of bulking up, like I said, is to accelerate muscle growth. It is not to put weight on the scale, because if you're focused on putting weight on the scale and saying, I'm 150 pounds right now, I want to hit 200. You may very well hit 200, but what is that weight consisting of? Do we want that weight to be consisting of muscle, water, fat? We ideally want it to be muscle. But what happens is, guys, myself included, I made this mistake when I started, we get focused on trying to hit a specific weight on the scale that we will gain any kind of weight in order to make this happen. But we don't want that. We want to gain muscle, and so muscle gain will be slower. So how does this relate to your waist? Well, if your weight's going up over time, your waist is likely also going to grow. And that's because the more food you're eating for a longer period of time, you're going to gain some body fat. This is inevitable. You can't just gain all muscle, 100% lean muscle. You'll gain some water, you'll gain some fat, and that's okay. But the speed of how fast your waist is growing is in direct correlation with how much fat you're gaining. And so if you are gaining lots of size on your waist, you're also gaining lots of fat. This is why it's a huge mistake, especially in the beginning, to focus on getting to a certain weight. I know it sounds cool. Believe me, I started at 122 pounds. Like, you have no idea how badly I wanted to be 200. But when I got to 200 for the first time, I was a little bit fat. And that's not ideal. That's not what we want. So I'll show you exactly how to measure your waist. Actually, I'll do it live. You only need one thing, and that is a tape measure. All you do is get a tape measure and you wrap it around your waist. Ideally, you want to do it if this is your torso and your belly button's right here and your hips are right here. You want to do the measurement around here. So in between your belly button and your hips, you want to do the tape measure. I measure it in inches. Personally, you can do centimeters, you can do square feet, I don't know, whatever you want to do, but I do it in inches. And so I will track my waist, and my goal here for the entirety of my bulk, the growth phase that we're entering, if my waist grows by more than 2 inches from when I started to any point during the bulk, any point at all. So if I start at 30 inches and my waist goes over 32, I know that I'm gaining more fat than I'd like to. And so I always want to keep it within a 2-inch range, because once you gain more than 2 inches, if you're gaining 5-6 inches on your waist during a bulk, then you know you are gaining almost all of your weight from fat. And that's just stupid and pointless. So 2 inches is the benchmark I set for myself. You could do 1 inch, you could do 3 inches. I think 2 inches gives you enough leeway to gain a lot of weight, but not a lot of fat. And that's just me personally. So that's how you track your waist. The last measurement that we're going to keep track of during our bulk is going to be the size of our muscle groups. Which muscle groups? Any of them really. Your arms, your chest, your shoulders, your legs, the width of your back. All of these things can be tracked. Now, you may have specific muscles that you want to focus on. For most guys, it is going to be their arms and their chest. That's going to be like the most popular ones, and that's totally cool. Honestly, those are the easiest ones to track. So, how do we track our muscle size? It works the same as our waist with a tape measure. But I want to make a quick note. I purposely organized the measurements we're talking about in this video in terms of what's going to grow the fastest. And so your weight is going to increase faster than your waist, and both of these things are going to increase faster than the size of your muscle groups. This is not something to be worried about. Your muscles are going to grow the slowest, and in 99 out of 100 cases, you're going to see strength gains faster than size gains. Strength precedes size. I don't know about you, but I've never met anybody who went to the gym, got stronger, and then got smaller. It doesn't work like that. Strength nearly has a perfect correlation with size. There's skinny people who are really strong, and there's really jacked guys who are really weak. There are anomalies, but for the most part, guys that are strong, most of the time, have more muscle than guys that aren't strong. And so, if your muscles aren't growing as fast as you'd like them to, it is nothing to be alarmed about. I'm going to say that again because so many times do we go for big goals. If this is you right now and this is where you want to be, and you're like, I want to get from here to here, but I'm going to give myself 3 months. Not realistic if this goal takes 5 years to get to. And so what'll happen is it's not the goals you're setting that is the problem. It's the time you're giving yourself to achieve them. Because if you don't get it in 3 months, you're going to feel like a failure. You're going to feel like you're not amounting to anything in life. That's not true. In the first 3 months of lifting, you're going to see some gains, but you're not going to turn into like Ronnie Coleman or Arnold Schwarzenegger. It doesn't happen like that. And so you have to give yourself that 3 to 5 years to achieve this goal. And by the time you've hit 3 to 5 years, you're going to be way friggin' past this goal anyways. So it's not really anything to stress about. All right, I'm going to go back to talking about tracking muscles because that was the original topic. So the only thing you need is a tape measure. Just like your waist, you're going to wrap it around. Let's just say you're measuring your arms. You're going to wrap it around your arm and then track the size of your arm. If you want to be accurate with it, you can track your arms before and then after, or even during the bulk. So if you want to track your arms every month, you can do that. But don't be surprised if you don't see any big gains from month to month. That's not exactly how it works. What'll happen is if you do give yourself 6 months to make some gains, you may very well put on 1 to 2 inches on your arms. Very possible. I don't know how many of you watching this are math nerds, but if you look at 1 to 2 inches of growth over a 6-month period and you stretch that out, that turns out to be like 0.0001 inches per day, right? Like this, it's astronomical how much smaller this is versus this. So don't expect to see these massive jumps in the month to month. In the day, you're not going to notice it. In the weeks, you're not going to notice it. In the months, you're probably not going to notice it. But if you look back 6 months from where you started, you're going to see those changes. It just doesn't happen that fast. And so most guys that go to the gym and are impatient with their results, it's not because they're bad at anything. It's just because they don't know how to set goals for the long term. So I'm telling you right now, massive warning, your muscles will grow the slowest out of anything. And I know that's the one thing that you're trying to grow, but this and this is always going to come before this every single time, unless you're taking abusive doses of steroids. But even then, your weight's going to grow before your muscles. So nothing to stress about. But that is basically how you track your muscles. You get a tape measure, you just wrap it around. Pretty simple. And so we've covered our weight, our waist, and our muscle groups. Let's get to the final metric, which is tracking your lifts. And by lifts, I mean your workouts. So the entire goal of tracking your lifts, there's only one of them, is to monitor your strength. Because like we talked about, there is pretty much a direct correlation between strength gains and muscular gains, size gains. And so if you are getting stronger over time, that is a good thing. If you are getting weaker over time, that is a bad thing. If you are staying the same over time, that is a bad thing. We want to guarantee that our strength is progressing. So how in the world are we going to progressive overload? You've probably seen this term somewhere, and I'm going to split it up into its two words. So progressive means that you are doing more of an action over time. Overload means that you are doing more than you can handle at that time. And so if you look at progressive overload, it is doing more than you can handle for an extended period of time and constantly moving that bar up. To give you a very real world example, when you go into the gym, you're going to have a limit on how much weight that you can lift in that workout. And so the goal is to approach that limit and train as hard as you can. Remember the intensity, right? We want to train to failure. And so we want to hit this ceiling of failure every single workout. And what it'll happen is over time, that ceiling is going to grow. And along with that ceiling, your ability to lift will grow in kind. But that doesn't happen unless you hit the ceiling. If you're working out and you're only going 3/4 of the way or halfway because it hurts and it burns and it's uncomfortable, you're never touching that ceiling. Therefore, that ceiling is never stressed enough to push. And neither are you. So over time, we have to progressively overload, meaning that we are lifting to our absolute maximum ability over time. And over time, our maximum ability improves. So what does that look like in the day-to-day? What does that look like when you're working out? And more importantly, how the heck does this have to do with tracking our lifts? I'm going to show you. I'm going to pick up my dumbbell for the gazillionth time. And let's just say I'm doing curls once again. I'm doing my curls, right? I'm controlling the weight. I'm squeezing at the top and full stretch at the bottom, control all the way down. And I'm curling and I hit my 8th and it's getting really hard. And then I do my 9th rep and I can barely get it. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go for my 10th rep. So I go for my 10th rep and I'm trying my absolute hardest. That weight is not going anywhere. My hand's seizing and I can't get the 10th rep and I fail. The weight comes back down. I know then if I'm not using any momentum and we're training smart, we're training hard, I know that I hit failure and I know that my biceps have failed. And my biceps have failed at 9 reps. Let's just say we're using 20 pounds. I'm asking you this at home. What do you think is going to happen the next time I go train that muscle group? The next time I go push that ceiling higher and higher and higher, what do you think is going to happen to this amount of reps? It's going to go up and you get stronger. And so now I'm doing 10 reps with 20 pounds. Next week or next workout that I train my biceps, I come back 11, 12, right? It keeps going up, but that doesn't happen unless I hit that first ceiling of 9 reps and then I push for 10, then 11, right? And so you'll continuously get stronger and then over time, getting jacked, building muscle happens as a byproduct. You don't just like wake up one day jacked, right? You'll do all the right things and you'll get stronger and then the muscle starts to really appear. And if you give yourself 5 years to achieve it, then you can see some crazy results. We are trying to hit failure every single workout and we're progressively overloading. So this is the easiest way to keep track of that. I call this a training log. And I actually have mine right here. And so if you open it up, there's a bunch of lifts that are tracked and you can't really read the handwriting. I can't read the handwriting either, to be honest. But every single time I go to the gym, I track how many reps I'm lifting, how many sets I'm doing, and how much weight I use for those sets. And so I'll show you how to make your own in less than 30 seconds. Let's see if we can do it. So at the top, I always want to get the date of the lift. That way I can refer back to certain dates and see how strong I was 3 months ago, 6 months ago, 2 years ago, right? The idea is that you're doing this for the long term, forever, hopefully. And then you want to write out the muscles that you're trying to train. So let's just say I'm training my chest and my triceps. I want to write chest and triceps up top. Then I'm going to write out 4 separate columns. And so I'll title them with their initials. So here we have the exercises that you're doing, the amount of reps you get, the amount of sets you're doing, and then the amount of weight you're using. And so this workout, I start out with bench press, and I fail and I get 7 reps on my first set with 100 pounds. This is all good and well, and we're going to do this for every single exercise. So you do it for all the exercise you do, all the reps you do, all the sets you do, all the weight you use. And you might be looking at this like, hey, this is a lot of work. Maybe, I mean, it takes me like 2 minutes to do all of this, and you're only going to get faster the more you do it. But if you want good results, then it's better to track more metrics. So you're going to track your reps, your sets, and the weight you use for every single exercise. And you'll notice if you're pushing your sets to failure every single time, you are going to get stronger. Next week, you come back, it's 8 reps with 100 pounds. The next week, it's 9 reps with 100 pounds. So you can see I'm getting stronger every single week. But I have a question for you. Do we just keep doing more reps? Are we just going to keep doing 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, a billion reps with 100 pounds? No, right? That doesn't make sense. And maybe at some point in your life, you heard of rep ranges. What are rep ranges? Well, it is essentially a range of reps. That's crazy. So an example of a rep range would be 6 to 9 reps. And real quick, if you've ever seen some kind of fitness video where the guy is saying, do this exercise for 6 to 9 reps, it doesn't mean you do 6 reps and you stop. The idea is that you are failing in between this rep range. You want to fail between 6 and 9 reps. And so if I'm doing my bench press, let's just say, and I get 6 reps, next week I get 7, next week I get 8, next week I get 9. Again, I'm not going to do 10, 11, 12, 13, a trillion reps. Not going to happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the weight. We've already progressively overloaded on our reps with our rep range, and now we are stronger than the rep range. If we're doing more than 9 reps in a set, we are stronger than our 6 to 9 rep range. And so 6 to 9 reps with 100 pounds is no longer challenging for us. And since we want to keep challenging ourselves, we have to make the exercise harder. And the easiest way to make the exercise harder is to add more weight. So how much weight do we add? That is a great question. Do we add 5 pounds, 50 pounds, a gazillion pounds? Maybe a gazillion is the right number. For me personally and my clients, I increase the weight by 10%. And so there's a reason why I don't say add 5 pounds or add 10 pounds, because if you're adding 10 pounds on your bench press, that's going to be a lot different than 10 pounds on a curl. There's a disproportionate amount of challenge depending on the exercise. So I prefer to go by percentages. If you remember from earlier, we were doing 100 pounds on bench press. When we get stronger than our 6 to 9 rep range, and we're now doing more reps than the rep range with the 100 pounds, then I'm going to add 10% of the weight. And so that will look like 110 pounds. And so if we're failing in the rep range of 6 to 9 reps and we go from 100 pounds to 110 pounds, I'm asking you this question, like legitimately, do you think that we'll still be able to do 10, 11, 12 reps with 110 pounds? No. The exercise is now heavier. It's more challenging. And so what'll happen is once you add that weight, you will go from stronger than the rep range to now adding weight and getting knocked right back into the rep range. And so when you add 10 pounds, when you go from 100 to 110, you might hit 6 or 7 reps. What do you think happens next? We repeat. We keep training to failure. Then we hit 8. Then we hit 9. Then we add weight. Then we get knocked back into the rep range. So you're essentially hitting failure every time, pushing that ceiling, and you repeat that process every single workout. And like I said, getting jacked, building muscle will occur as a byproduct. It will happen on its own. It's not something that you force or you go to the gym with the goal of getting jacked. You can do that, but it's not going to happen that workout. You're going to do these things over time. You get more reps, you add weight, you get knocked back into the rep range, you get more reps, add weight, knocked back into the rep range, and over time, you're going to get jacked. I cannot stress the importance of this enough, and this is why I'm so huge on tracking workouts. Maybe you don't want to do a book like I'm doing. I'm old-fashioned that way, so I prefer my book. Maybe you want to do it on an app. you can do that. There's apps for that. I know there's an app. The name of the app is called Strong, and so you can search it up. I'm pretty sure it's free, but I don't use it, so I wouldn't really know. What I'm saying is knowing how much you're lifting is really important. And so when I pull out my green notebook with my pen and I'm writing down like I'm in school, sometimes I get weird looks. I've gotten comments from friends and fellow people who go to the gym, and they tease me about it a little bit, right? They're wondering why I'm being so specific and like methodical with my approach. Like, why can't you just lift the weights like the rest of us? Well, the reality is I'm trying to get better results than all of you. And so I'm going to do the things that most people aren't willing to do in order to increase the likelihood of that happening. That would mean tracking your lifts. And so, like I said, to sum that part up, you can get a training log, and then you're going to go to the gym, train to failure. Then the next workout, you'll get more reps. And then once you're out of the rep range, you add 10% of the weight onto the total. And so 100 becomes 110 pounds, 200 becomes 220 pounds, 10% of the weight. And you repeat that process around and around and around and around. And then you get jacked and happy and life's good. But that's how you track your lifts. I'm going to be totally upfront with you. This is probably the most information heavy fitness video on the internet. And so if you're in it this far, I'm proud of you. And I hope that you've learned at least one thing. But now we're going to compile everything that we learned from our nutrition, from our training, from our tracking into the actions, because I'm a firm believer that we cannot sit back and pray to God that we are going to just make gains and gains are going to appear. We have to do things in order to make these gains happen. And so, to me, the key to doing that is by actions. And I'll break them up into 3 ways. Actions you do every day, actions you do every week, and actions you do every month. And so by the end of this video, you'll know exactly what to do step by step every single day, every single week, every single month. And all of these things done over a period of 6 months will lead to gains. So without further ado, let's finish off the rest of this video. Starting with our daily actions, I'm going to break it up into 3 columns: train, eat, and recover. I know we didn't talk about recovery much in this video, but there's only 2 things that I have to write out for this, so it's going to be pretty easy. The way I'm going to write out the actions is in order of things that you need to do, so from start to finish. And the things that I write with this blue marker are things that you need to track. So you're going to go into the gym. Obviously, you're not working out every single day, but when you go to the gym, you're going to warm up, you're going to train to failure on all your sets, and then you're going to write down on those sets to failure the amount of reps you got, the amount of sets you did, and the weight you used for those sets and those reps. If you remember earlier with a dumbbell, I got 9 reps with 20 pounds. Pretty simple. We go in, we warm up, we train to failure, and then we track it. Let's move on to the diet. For our food, we want to make sure that we're hitting our calorie goal every single day. So for you, your calorie goal will look different from mine, but let's just say your number is 3,000 per day. You want to be eating 3,000 calories per day. Next, we have to eat on time. So what I mean by this is ideally you want to be spacing your meals, like I said, far enough apart that you can digest. So if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 meals, you want to make sure that there's time in between each meal, which means you'll probably have to plan when you're eating. And these times will look different depending on who you are. But let's just say you eat at 8 a.m., 12 p.m., 3 p.m., 5 p.m., and 8 p.m. You have to eat at those times that you set for yourself. Because if you delay one meal, then guess what happens to the other meals? They also get delayed. And guess what happens when you delay meals? You don't get to bed on time, you get crappy sleep, you don't recover, right? We'll cover this in a second. And so you have to make sure that you're eating your meals on time. If you're not doing that every day, your digestion's not going to be as good. You're going to be stressed out. You're going to have to eat back-to-back meals because you didn't give yourself enough time in between each meal. And so you have to eat these 2 meals now back-to-back. That sucks. And it's really painful, especially when you're already full and you don't feel like eating anymore. So eating on time is crucial. I've covered exactly how I eat on time in other videos before, so I won't go too deep into it, but I will make a video specifically on this very soon. Finally, with our blue marker, we want to track our calories using a scale and an app. Like I said, you can measure using cups, you can measure using tablespoons, bowls, whatever, but it's not always as accurate. Sometimes you could have a heaping scoop of food and sometimes you could have not enough, and still call it 1 cup. So if you want to be exact, if you want to increase the probability of you making progress and making gains, I would start with a scale and an app. And if you don't feel like tracking calories, but you still want to nail these 2 things, then I have free meal plans that also do that, but I'll talk about that later. So if you're eating enough calories to grow and you're splitting those calories into meals, let's just say you're eating 4 meals a day and you split those meals across the day and eat each of those meals on time. And when you're eating those meals, when you're hitting those calories, you're tracking everything that you're eating using a food scale and an app, and you're doing that every day along with your training, the likelihood that you're making gains is now pretty friggin' high. Finally, we have our recovery. And I want to say that there is no muscle growth, there is no gains without this. You could do all the training, all the eating in the world, but if you're getting 3 hours of sleep a night, it all goes in the toilet. I don't even want to hear what you have to say about these things until this is down. And so the reason why I didn't cover it much in the video is because it's pretty simple. We just need to be in bed on time and not stress ourselves out of progress. What I mean by this is that you are intentionally, purposely prioritizing your sleep. And that can mean getting to bed earlier. That can mean getting higher quality sleep. That can mean getting longer sleep. I've covered how to optimize this in other videos, so I won't go too deep into it. But basically, you don't just sleep when the day's done or when you feel tired or when you're done watching YouTube. You purposely set a time to get to bed and make sure you're in bed by that time, because it's pretty hard to sleep in late. It's pretty hard to not recover if you're going to bed at 9 p.m., right? You can go to bed at 9 p.m., get 8 hours of sleep, and wake up at 5. So we want to make sure that this is nailed. And I'm not saying you have to be in bed by 9 p.m., but if your sleep is so wacky that one day you're in bed at 11, the next day you're in bed at 3, that's something that we need to take care of. And what I mean by this is that going to the gym and building muscle is unlike any goal that you've ever gone for. It's not like graduating college, running a business, going for a promotion at work. It's not something where stressing yourself out mentally with a bunch of pressure creates more results. It actually makes it worse, like a lot worse. When I talk about stress in the gym, when you're training, I mean the tension on the muscle, right? The muscle is under stress. But what I don't mean is the stress on your mind, the pressure that you put on yourself to make more progress, and you're stressing out and you're worried. Am I making gains? Am I not? This thing's bothering me. These people are making my life harder. Traffic's really bad today. That kind of stuff. So my best advice is don't stress the small stuff, right? Life's going to throw problems at you. And in fact, every single time that you've experienced stress at fast paces, it means that you are growing at a fast pace. And so life is stressful when you're growing. Life is stressful when you're staying the same because we don't want to stay in the same spot. And life is definitely stressful when we're getting worse. So there's stress all around. Being stressed is just a sign that you're alive. So if you're stressed, good. That means you're doing something. And if you're stressed and seeing progress and you're getting stronger on your lifts, you're hitting your calorie goal, there's a very good chance that that stress is making room for growth. And that could be growth in your muscles, growth in your strength, but it's also growth in your character too, right? You're building discipline. You're pushing yourself to do something you've never done before. It can be hard, and the stress that comes with that will lead to growth. The stress I'm telling you to avoid is that pressure that you put on your shoulders. Am I making gains or not, right? Worrying about all the small stuff. That small stuff's going to happen every single day. The key is to just not focus on it. Don't even decide it's a problem. Life, like this is life. The traffic that you experience is life. The people pissing you off, that is life. Don't stress yourself and then lose sleep, not hit your calorie goal, not train hard, not track anything, right? Because if you let this thing affect all the other areas of your life, then everything else comes back down. So things are going to happen. Bad things happen all the time. Bad things do not happen in threes. When people say bad things happen in threes, that's just a piss poor excuse for letting one bad thing affect the next. And so I don't want to see you get stressed out over small stuff. Stress yourself in the gym. For sure, stress yourself in the gym. Push yourself as hard as you can. Keep the tension on that muscle. But don't worry about if you're making gains or not. If you are doing these actions every single day, progress is pretty much guaranteed. But I also want to cover the actions that you're doing once a week and once a month so you can think more long term. But in short, if you were doing these things every single day, I have not seen a better formula for making gains in the gym, getting stronger, ever in my entire life. This is it. Do this every day and the results will come. But we'll talk about the actions that you now have to take on a weekly basis. So let's do that. For our weekly actions, we only have 2 columns that we have to worry about: the metrics that we're tracking and then the activities that we're doing. And for this, these are activities that you don't do on a daily basis, but you probably do it more days rather than not. So 4 out of the 7 days a week, you can expect to do these things. And there's only 2 actions you have to take here. You got to weigh in and measure your waist. So remember, we're going to the bathroom first thing in the morning, not eating, not drinking. Take a pee, take a poop, and then step on the scale with no clothes, weigh yourself, and track it. You want to make sure that you're doing this at least once a week, ideally once or twice a week, so that you know what your weight is looking like. Because if you only weigh yourself once every 3 months, a lot can change in 3 months. And if you're weighing yourself once a day, then your weight will go up, it'll go down, it'll go around and around and around. And so it's just better to see the general trend over the course of a long period of time and then just weigh in once a week. And as for your waist, you're going to do the same thing. You could just measure once a week. I personally weigh in and I weigh my clients in on Thursdays and Sundays, and then I get them to measure their waist on Sundays. So I only measure my waist once a week, and so do they, and it seems to be working out pretty good. If you remember from earlier, we have the 2-inch rule, right? 2 inches. We don't want to be gaining more than 2 inches throughout the entire bulk. It doesn't matter if it's from month 1 to 3, month 1 to 6. We still want to keep it under 2 inches the entire time. So if you're starting at 30 inches and you get to 32 and a half, that's probably a good sign that you're gaining a little bit too much fat. Once again, you can do 3 inches, 5 inches, whatever you want. I think 2 inches just puts you in the zone where you can gain a lot of muscle and a lot of weight, but not have that weight be fat. Because if you're gaining a lot of size on your waist, that is a very good indication that you are getting chubby. Okay, let's talk about activities. And as for our weekly activities, I'd like to see you do some form of cardio, and preferably doing it for more days out of the week than not. So you could be doing it for 4 out of the 7 days a week. And by cardio, I don't mean running 5 miles or doing the Boston Marathon every Monday. That's not what I'm talking about. You could just be sitting on a bike for 20 minutes, burn 200 calories, good to go. When I'm bulking up, I personally try to burn 150 calories every morning with some sort of cardio. Could be walking, incline treadmill, Stairmaster, seated bike, those kind of things. But some form of cardiovascular activity where your heart and your lungs are being challenged, because the reality is you're not going to lose gains from doing cardio, especially if it's just burning 150 calories. If you're running marathons or you're doing insane races where your body's constantly stressed, yes, that might get in the way. But if you're just walking on a treadmill or sitting back on a bike, you'll be totally fine. And also, I want to make another point. When you're eating a lot more calories than you're burning off in a bulk, sometimes that top end of the calories, this little area right here, gets used for fat. Those extra calories are stored as fat. But if you're doing cardio and you're burning off these extra calories, then the rest of the calories that you're eating get converted to muscle. And so all the calories that you're eating, or at least most of them, are getting directly converted to muscle. So you're actually burning some of the excess fat on and keeping yourself lean while you're bulking up, which is pretty cool. So I recommend that you do cardio throughout the bulk, throughout the cut, year round. I recommend doing cardio. For most days out of the week, I recommend doing it, but I wouldn't say to do it pre or post workout. I would do it at a separate time in the day or a different day altogether, because if you're doing it pre-workout, it's a good way to warm up, but it could take the energy away from your workout. But if you're doing the cardio right after your workout, then you're kind of digging yourself in a deeper hole for recovery, and you're not using the resources that would be used to build muscle back. You're instead devoting those to cardio, which is not what we want. So I'd recommend doing cardio on a completely separate day if you can, or if you're doing it on the same days you're training and you're working out at night, do cardio in the morning. If you're working out in the morning, do cardio at night, something like that. But try to be relatively consistent with it. Do not skip it. I know it probably feels like this isn't going to help you at all, but in the long run, you are going to thank yourself and me, hopefully. Anyways, we also want to buy groceries. Obviously, we need to buy food throughout the week. I mentioned that I'm giving away free meal plans, and each meal plan comes with a grocery list that shows you what to buy in exact amounts for the entire week. So you only need to shop once. Finally, this is a bit of a bonus, so I'll put a star next to it. But if you want to save time while you're cooking, I highly recommend meal prepping. It takes me 2 hours a week to meal prep 14 meals. And that's pretty friggin' fast considering it takes most guys, 30 minutes to cook one meal. It takes me 2 hours to cook 14. So if you want to cook fast and not waste time, I highly recommend meal prepping. I have a video about it on the channel. I will upload an updated one because the production on that first one was horrible. So I'm going to do another meal prep video for you guys soon. But yeah, cardio, buying groceries, meal prep, and make sure to weigh in once a week and measure your waist once a week as well. Let's talk about the actions you only need to do once a month. Finally, we have our monthly actions, and I split these up into metrics and a bit of a weird one. We're going to ask ourselves an important question, but I'm going to get to that in a second. So we want to track the measurements of our muscles. By the end of the month, we want to see how much we're growing. Now, this is actually something that I would say is optional because your muscles might not grow from month to month. They may grow from month 1 to 6, but maybe in the second or third month, you don't really see anything. And so I wouldn't obsess over this. If you want to do it, you can. But something I do recommend is that you read over your training log. So you can look back, I'll draw over here for a sec. You can look back at the start of the month and at the end of the month, and you can examine the lifts that you did at the start of the month. Maybe you did your back day, your chest day, your arm day, your leg day, whatever. And then you can look at your back, your chest, your arm day, your leg day. Did I get stronger over the course of a month? And if you can answer that with a yes, then that is a great sign that you're putting on muscle. But let's talk about the question that I want you to ask yourself. Probably the most important question. And you have to be honest with yourself here. If you're lying to yourself, then, it's no good. And this ever so important question is, did I do the daily and weekly actions to the best of my ability? And so I'm not worried about you getting everything right on the first try. I'm not worried about you going from 150 to 200 pounds after week 1. This is going to happen over time. But those daily, those weekly actions, did you work your absolute hardest to make sure those got done? Did you do what is required? Because if you're constantly pushing your limits and at the end of the day, you can go to bed feeling like I did everything I could today to achieve this goal, getting jacked will happen on its own. It'll happen as a byproduct. Since it happens as a byproduct, that means you can focus on the daily and weekly actions and know that this is going to happen on its own. So it's not something to stress about. But over time, as you do the daily actions, as you eat all your meals, train hard, get to bed on time, track the metrics, do everything that we talked about throughout this video, your best is going to get better. Your best is going to improve. And so 6 months from now, your best might be 100 times better than your best today. And so I'm most concerned with you getting the daily and weekly actions done, and not only getting them done, but learning from them. Eating all the meals and realizing maybe, hey, I don't like this food, let me switch it out for something else. I don't like chicken, let me change it for beef. I don't like this style of training, let me try this exercise, or let me try this split next. Constantly iterating and constantly improving. And so it's not just repeat, and do the same thing over and over again and go in a spiral, right? We're repeating, but we're repeating with the intention to get better. And so, like I said, if you do that, give yourself 6 months, your best is going to improve. That's how you get better. So if you can look yourself in the eyes, like I'm doing with you right now, you can look yourself in the eyes and you can say yes to this question. I did the daily and weekly actions to the best of my ability today. This is going to happen on its own. Like, you will get jacked. You will make progress. It probably doesn't feel like that now. It probably feels like it's unattainable. It's impossible. I get it. Like, I started exactly where you were. So I understand. But I also understand what it takes to get there. And for me, and the guys I coach, who are all getting results, by the way, this is how it works. So we've covered a huge amount of information. We covered everything when it comes to the basics of training, nutrition, tracking your training and nutrition. And we summarized all that information into daily, weekly, and monthly actions. And now I'm going to answer, I'll call it FAQs, frequently asked questions, but just questions that you might have along the way, how to keep the progress moving forward, because you can't just eat your meals and go to the gym. Like, you have to make these adjustments in order to keep that progress moving up. So let's talk about that. The first question I'll answer is, how much weight do I want to gain per week? So this depends on your goal. But remember, we talked earlier about the calorie surplus and the range that we want to start with, 300 to 700 calories over our maintenance. Like I said, if you're in the middle, you're not sure which one to pick, I would err in the middle to this side, because most times you probably don't need a 700 calorie surplus to start. And so I'd start with 300 to 500 over your maintenance. But if you're looking for the amount of weight you want to gain per week, ideally between 0.5 and 1.2 pounds per week. The reason why I don't say less than this is because that's pretty slow gains, especially if you're a newer guy watching this and you're new to the gym, then those 0.2, 0.3 pound gains per week aren't really doing much for you. And if you're gaining a lot more than 1.2 pounds per week, if you're bulking up and you're gaining like 2 to 3 pounds a week, the majority of that's going to be fat and water, and that's not what we want. We want to build muscle. So that's not ideal. For me, the golden range has been between 0.5 and 1.2. If one week you're 0.6 pounds gained in a week and the other week you're 1.1, it's not really a bad thing. Your weight's going to fluctuate naturally. And so that's nothing to stress about. You're not always going to be like 1 pound, 1 pound, 1 pound, 1 pound per week. It's not always going to be consistent like that. So that's not something to concern yourself with. But gaining anywhere between 0.5 and 1.2 pounds per week pretty much guarantees that the majority of the weight you're putting on is muscle. Question number 2, how long do I bulk for, right? This was a question of quantity. This is a measurement of time. How long am I bulking for? Well, this depends on your surplus. So I'm going to bring it up again, 300 to 700 calories over your maintenance. If you are over on this side with a smaller calorie surplus, then you can bulk for longer. If you are on a bigger side, you're going to get fatter faster. So your bulk's going to be a little slower. But it really depends on the person. It depends on you. I'll give you a rough time estimate, just so I'm not leaving you in the dust. So you can expect to see some pretty serious results between 4 and 12 months of bulking. And I'll grab a different color marker here. If you were starting with a smaller calorie surplus, then you can bulk for longer. If you're starting with a bigger calorie surplus, then chances are you're going to get fatter quicker. And so I would go for a shorter surplus, meaning you don't have to do it as long. We've already covered the difference between a low calorie surplus and a high calorie surplus, but basically the less calories you're eating over your maintenance, the longer you can do it for, because you're going to gain lean size without gaining a ton of fat. And the bigger calorie surplus, the shorter you can do it for. So anywhere between this range, you can expect to see gains either way. Question 3, what do I do when my weight plateaus? So if my weight's going up, right, we're gaining our 0.5 to 1.2 pounds per week, and then all of a sudden it stops. My weight is the same week after week after week. What do I do? Great question. I didn't cover this earlier in the video because I wanted to save it for the end so that you'd remember. Okay, this is a pretty important topic. We don't want to just, like I said, eat meals and train, right? We have to make adjustments throughout the process. So when your weight stops going up, ideally I won't make any adjustments for about 3 weigh-ins in a row. So if your weight is the same for 3 weigh-ins in a row, then I know that you've plateaued. And basically the reason why this is happening is because when you're starting, you have a maintenance level of calories. Remember we talked about your maintenance calories? That is your maintenance right now. But as you're getting bigger, your maintenance calories is going to go up. As you lose weight, your maintenance calories goes down. And so all this means, these plateaus, all this means is that you've hit a new maintenance calories. The food you're eating right now is only enough to sustain you. And so if you want to keep growing, if you feel that you're still lean and you're not fat, and you want to keep pushing more weight, then I add not a certain amount of calories, but I add a percentage. I add 5% of the calories onto the daily total. So what does that look like? If you're eating 3,000 calories a day on your bulk and your weight's going up, and then eventually your weight stops and you plateau for 3 weigh-ins consecutively, adding 5% of the calories, what would that be? That would be 150 calories. So your new intake would be 3,150 calories. And as long as you want to keep bulking, you're not fat, and you still want to keep gaining weight, you can repeat this process pretty much endlessly. So you go to 3,150, then your weight goes up, and then it plateaus again, you're stuck. You add another 5%. I don't know what that is. I don't know what 5% is of this, but let's just assume it's another 150 calories. Now you're up to 3,300. And so this is how you improve your progress over time. An easy way I can explain this is like the bigger your vehicle gets, the bigger your gas tank gets. And so expect to take in more gas if you're getting a bigger vehicle. But that is how you keep progressing on a bulk. And the fourth question is going to be the opposite of this. What do I do when I'm getting fat? So this question covered how to keep growing. This one's going to cover how to stop growing. And so if you're gaining more fat than you'd like to and you don't want to keep adding calories, what you're going to do is the complete opposite. You're going to decrease by 5%. So if you're eating 3,000 calories, that now becomes 2,850. If you want another way to cut back on the food, you can just add another cardio session. Right? We talked about cardio earlier. If you want to use the same logic, then you can just burn 150 calories in your cardio session. Just ride the bike one more time throughout the week, right? We're doing more cardio. You can actually do both. You can do a reduction in calories and an increase in cardio and burn even more calories. But if you're doing cardio from day one, like I said, highly recommend, then this probably isn't going to happen to you. And so if you're doing cardio with a 300 to 500 calorie surplus and you're only increasing calories once your weight plateaus, then you're not going to get fat. Like you will gain a little bit of fluff. You might notice that your face gets slightly more round, like mine is right now, because I'm bulking. But it doesn't mean I'm fat. I still got abs, I still got a jawline, everything else. And so this isn't really something to stress about. It's only if you've run one of those 700 calorie plus surpluses, right? And then now you need to dial it back, which is why I don't recommend going for super high calorie surpluses. So if you're doing that 300 to 500 calories and you're doing cardio, like it's pretty hard to get fat on a bulk. But if you do end up getting fat and pushing it too far, I've done it before myself multiple times, you can just decrease calorie intake by 5% or add more cardio. Your call. I'll do one more question. The last question we have is, what do I do when I plateau in the gym? So all of these questions, these first four, could be solved with your diet. But what about this one? This would be solved with your training and recovery. So I'll get rid of these. So I'll get rid of this on the bottom just so we have a little extra room to work with. What do I do when I plateau in the gym? I would define a plateau as doing the same reps, maybe the same weight, doing less reps or less weight. Or you might have both at once. Very possible. So how do we get over this? Well, first of all, I want to say that if you're training and you're working hard and you're training to failure, you're doing all the right things that we talked about throughout the video, and you're working really hard in the gym and you're training, and eventually you hit a wall. The solution to that is never, ever, 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 ever more training. That's not the solution. If you cannot do the same reps or do the same weight, or you're doing less reps with less weight, the solution isn't to do more. Your body is exhausted, and it can be exhausted in two ways. You could just be fatigued, you have no energy, you have no strength, your muscles have given out, or your body could just be so used to the training that you're doing that it just gets repetitive. Either of these I'd consider exhaustion. And so either your body is actually exhausted of energy, or your muscles, everything else is so used to the training that this becomes exhausted. So the solution is never, ever, ever in the world more training. If what you're doing has not gotten you results, either more strength or more size within the last month, then more of it is not going to make it work. So please do not train more. If you hit this wall, here is exactly what I do. This is what I do personally, and it's worked 100% of the time. It's never missed. And so I'm going to recommend it to you. Take 7 days off the gym. I know it sounds extreme. I get it. Take a full week off the gym. Don't go to the gym at all. I don't want to see you at the gym. If I see you at the gym, we're going to have some problems. So take a full week off the gym. Make sure that you're still eating your meals and getting to bed on time, right? We still want to recover and we still want to get all our food in. So we're still eating our food, getting to bed on time. That stuff stays the same. The only thing that's changing is that we are taking 7 days off the gym. Once those 7 days are up, I want you to go back to the gym. But instead of going right back into your regular routine, let's just say you're lifting 6 days a week, I want you to cut it down in half to 3. If you're lifting 4 days a week, cut it down to 2. If you're lifting 5 days a week, you can't do 2.5 days a week, go 2 days a week. And so cut whatever you're doing in half. 6 days turns to 3, 4 days to 2, 5 days turns to 2 or 3, depending on what you're feeling. Essentially, you are cutting back your frequency, the training frequency, the amount of times you're going to the gym in a specific period of time. And so you're going to train with the same intensity. You're going to do your exact same workout, the same sets, try to work within the same rep ranges, and you're going to do everything the same. And then after that week is done, then you can go full bore right back into it. But if you want to be a little more specific, I would only go back into the full swing of things once you see that this is resolved. Because if you go back into the full swing and these aren't resolved, you're just going to run into the problem again. So this is actually a 2-week process. This is a 14-day process. I know, pretty crazy, but we're making gains for decades. We're not making gains for days. This is a 14-day process. And so I'll run it over one more time. If you're training and you hit a plateau, suddenly you can only do the same reps or the same weight, or you're actually getting weaker, you're doing less reps or less weight, take a full week off the gym. You take a full week off the gym, still eat your food, still get to bed on time. Then when you go to the gym, after the 7 days is done, for the next week, you will do half of the amount of training frequency that you did before. Meaning if you go to the gym 6 days a week, you go to the gym now 3. If you go to the gym 4 days, it turns to 2, right? And so you're going to do this half frequency for a week. So now that our 14 days is up, look at your training log, right? We're still tracking our lifts this entire time. We're still tracking our lifts. This is why it's really important to track your lifts, by the way. So you know, am I doing the same reps? Am I doing the same weight? Am I getting weaker still? Or am I getting stronger? If you're getting stronger and your reps and weight are going back up to normal and they're even getting better as a bonus, then you know you are in the clear. You're good to go. And so you've gone over this plateau. You are going to run into a plateau like this eventually. It might not happen within week 1, month 3, maybe even month 6, but eventually within a 5-year time span, you will absolutely run into one of these. And that is okay. So that is exactly how you handle a plateau in the gym. Now there's a bunch of different ways that you can handle this. Some people suggest taking a deload week. Maybe you've heard that before. I think deloads are great, but I also think that just some people need to just take time off the gym, period. And so if you're someone who struggles taking rest days, if you get really antsy when you can't go to the gym every single day, then you're going to have a really hard time putting on lots of muscle because you need to rest to grow. So that's how we handle that. And so there's a bunch of different ways you can solve this. I'm not going to concern myself with anyone saying in the comments like, this isn't the way to do it. I do it like this. Great. If it works for you, that's awesome. But like I said, take a week off the gym, eat your food, get to bed on time. Then when you go back to the gym, train half the amount for the next 7 days, and then analyze these. That's how I do it. Okay, that was a lot of information. We started by covering basic terms and concepts in fitness, just so you're not shocked by the unexpected when the unexpected occurs. Then we moved to the basics of training, the 4 basic principles of working out. And then we moved to nutrition, how to supplement that training with food. We then covered 4 more basic principles of your diet. And then from that, we took those 2 things and found ways to track the metrics in our training and our nutrition so that we know what's going on throughout the 6-month process. And with all that was encompassed into daily, weekly, and monthly actions. And so if you follow those daily actions every single day, those weekly actions once a week or on a regular basis, and those monthly actions every month, you will see faster gains than you've ever seen in your entire life. It took me a very long time to compile this information into actions that somebody has to take to get results. And so many times in fitness do I see eat more food or train hard or you just got to recover, bro. Like people already know that stuff, right? That's general information. But what happens in the day-to-day? What are the actual things that you do that when you do them, muscle growth and strength occur as a result? And so this entire video was exactly that. And if you want everything in this video implemented directly into your life, meaning you don't have to learn any of this stuff, the gains that you're looking for will happen from day one, you can go to theincrediblebulk.ca/join. I'm currently taking on one-on-one clients to transform them from skinny to jacked. And so if that's something you're looking for, you can head to the first link in the description. But if you're okay with doing this on your own and you're okay to take that extra time to learn all of this and so much more, I have some resources that can help with that for free. And so I have custom meal plans and custom training plans, not as custom as my one-on-one stuff because that's actually tailored to you specifically, but I have free meal plans and training plans as links in the description below. And if you're looking for tips where I solve problems live on video and make posts about them, I have all my social media links below that at the bottom. So guys, I appreciate you watching this video. I've been George Tressiter, founder of The Incredible Bulk, where we take skinny guys and turn them into jacked guys fast. But if you want a complete summary of this entire huge video compiled into one page, I'll have that as the final link in the description, and you can download that absolutely free so you know what to do. So guys, like I said, I've been George Tressiter, and I got nothing else to say, so I'll catch you next time.